Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly, both as parents and young adults from teens to 20-something. In this episode, we're covering the topic of fear. The times we're living in are unprecedented and outcomes are uncertain. It's hard to move forward, make decisions, and not be frozen by fear. Whether you're a parent who's seen your fair share of crazy in this life already and it's left you a bit worn out, or you're a brand new grown up looking around and wondering if this is really what you have to endure as a full-fledged adult, confronting our fears in order to live a joyful, authentic life is scary, yet necessary. Let's dive into this discussion. I'm Marci and I'm the mom.
I'm Cayd and I'm her kid. Fear is something that young adults maybe don't like to admit having. It's, almost kind of sometimes I feel like shamed to be afraid of, making big life changes or things like that. And I know there are a lot of parents that also don't like to share fear with their kids, whether they're young adults or even young kids. But it's really important to recognize fear when it comes up, to talk through it with someone that you trust, and then face it with action and, really address the fear head on. So Mom, let's start with you. What were things that you were afraid of as a parent, or you are afraid of as a parent of bigs?
Yeah, so I think the scariest thing about being the parent of bigs is like you spend so much of your life with them under your roof, right? And there's so much of their lives that you're in control of. And then when they grow up and they move out and they go out into the big world and they're making their own decisions, their own choices, living in their own spaces, as a parent, you don't worry any less. You pray you've done your job because your time is up and now you're just there as support. But it really seems to me like if you haven't done your job as a parent by 16 or 17, you're kind of out of time. So, not that you can't circle back and better the relationship and things like that, but most of what kids are taught as it pertains to getting out on their own and being a young adult is done by about that time. So, the scariest thing for me, I think, is that while you guys are fully capable of making your own decisions, it is scary to think that sometimes those decisions you make may not end up in the outcome that you would have liked. And especially if that results in any kind of danger or anything, to my child as a parent, that you worry
Mhm.
about them when they're, out at somebody's wedding reception. You're worried about how they're getting home. Now, you guys are great. You guys Uber all over the place, or you have a DD, but there still is that fear always in parents' minds. You worry that, someone is going to go into a neighborhood that isn't great when they're out on their run accidentally, right? They wouldn't do that on purpose. You worry that they're going to get in a car accident. You worry that they're going to get sick and maybe not recognize it and put it in check-in time. All those mom things that you kind of used to take care of, they now have to take care of themselves. So that's one of the things that I've been most afraid of, is just that you're out there doing everything on your own and you don't have the safety net anymore that kids
Mhm.
typically have when they're living in the home. You know, I don't particularly worry about this right now, but I actually heard a friend of mine say this the other day about her kids that are in their late 20s, that she's afraid they're forgetting about her. And while I
Mhm.
don't foresee that happening for our family in particular, I could be totally
Mhm.
wrong. And once you guys are, chest deep rather than knee deep into your own
Uh-huh.
lives, right? It might be a little bit easier to kind of forget to check in and, forget that as you age and as you become adults, when you're little, it's not your responsibility to care about your parents at all. When you're older, I do feel like that shifts. Your parents don't become your problem. Like, you're not supposed to solve their problems for you, just like they're not supposed to solve your adult problems, right? We're both adults
Mhm.
coming to this, but being there to support each other. So I also think sometimes just as parents, we have a fear that our kids are going to go down the wrong path. And,
Mhm.
sometimes those paths are very, very obvious. If you've got a child who's going down the path of a drug addict or who's living on the streets, they're doing things like that, your child is going down a rough path, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes it's just simple things like if they're with a partner that you don't particularly care for and you don't like how they treat them, or they're living in a neighborhood that you think is a little too dangerous for them and they're coming home at 11 o'clock at night, things like paths like that, or they're taking maybe like a sidestep in their career and you fear that
Mhm.
it's going to mean long-term consequences for them. All things they need to decide for themselves, but as a parent, you still worry.
for sure.
So those are the biggest ones, I think. Kate, as a 20
Yeah.
something, what are the things that caused you the most fear, you or your friends, kind of at
Hmm.
this stage in your life as a new adult?
Yeah, I think it's almost kind of just like the fear of the unknown and the fear of kind of being in that situation where you are making decisions for yourself for the first time. I think kind of like you talked about how you as a parent, are afraid of like your kids, making decisions and either you not knowing about it or, whatever. I think that there's also kind of that same fear as a young adult. There does come that freedom with being a young adult of, oh, now I get to make these decisions. And, it's not my mom telling me, oh, I need to go to the doctor or, oh, I need to, do this or do that or be careful about this. So I think that part of it is a little exciting of being able to make those decisions and have that freedom. But also it's scary, kind of like you talked about with like a change in career. That's a decision that a lot of kids have to make either, once they finish college or, finish high school, they have to figure out what career they want to go into. And then if they don't like it, they have to make that jump to a different career and what, kind of that fear. So I think that I just based off of what you just said, I think young adults fear the same thing parents fear, just in a different way from a different perspective. But I think that's a fear. I think that some people fear, not being successful or not, living up to what they thought they had done. I know me and some of my friends just had a conversation not too long ago about how when we were younger, we all thought like, okay, we're going to graduate our high school at 18 and then graduate college at 22 and then start this, big full-time paying job and then get married by 25 and then have kids by 28. And then like, it was like you almost all kind of had this path laid out. And now for a lot of us, life has looked differently. There were a lot of my friends who got married at 20 years old instead of the 28 years old that they had planned, or they're 28 years old and they, still aren't in a relationship or whatever that situation may look like. So I think there's that kind of fear of, I don't know how to describe it, whether it's just a fear of not following the plan that you thought you had or a fear of falling behind. I think that that is something that's big for a lot of people my age, especially with social media and things like that. It's you see every time someone gets engaged or when people get a new job and they post about it or they have a new baby or whatever. So I think that a lot of just based off conversations I've had with my friends, a lot of times it's, oh, well, this other person who's 21 is doing this and I feel like I'm behind because I'm not doing that. Or, this other person was driving this car at 21 and I'm not driving it, or, whatever the situation may be. I think that that's something that a lot of young adults fear for sure.
And everybody's on their own journey, right? And so
Hmm.
that fear of that is caused by comparison, right? Or even comparison against your own plan that you thought
Hmm.
you had for yourself. That in and of itself is not a new concept. Like I remember thinking the same thing, that I'd be married by the
Uh-huh.
time I was 25 and I would have reached a certain point in my career by a certain age. And when those things didn't happen, I remember 25, that birthday being very difficult for me because I was not where I thought I should be. And people are like, oh, wasn't 40 hard? Wasn't 50 hard? I'm like, no, 25 was hard. But simply because it was not even that I was disappointed because I knew I had worked hard and done what I
Hmm.
needed to do to get where I was, but it wasn't where I thought I was going to be.
Hmm.
And I loved what you brought up about the fact that a lot of the concerns that the parent has are the same, just from a different perspective
Hmm.
as the ones that the child has. The kids got a lot of pressure on themselves to, make things turn out the way they want them to turn
Hmm.
out. And the parents are just sitting in the background, hoping, praying, wishing that
Exactly.
their child experiences that
Hmm.
success, right?
And I think that
And
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that fear is almost worse for the kid. I think they're both bad, but as a parent, it's kind of like you talked about, your kid going down a bad path. As a parent, you don't want your kid to go down a bad path. But
Mhm.
like you said, you're kind of just taking the back seat and observing. But as a kid, or not as a kid, as a young adult, or even just any adult, you have to take responsibility for the actions that you did to get there. So if I go down a wrong path, yes, you're afraid of it and you're sad about it and whatever, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of sitting there thinking, oh, I'm the reason I went down this wrong path or I made
Mhm.
that choice. So I think that that is just goes back to what I said earlier about it just being from a different perspective, but still kind of being the same fear.
And I'm glad you brought that up, that, as an adult, you are responsible for the choices that you made and for the outcomes that it delivered. Because I do think there is a segment of society that every time something goes wrong in their adult life, they blame their parents.
Hmm.
And while I think there are a lot of parents who did parenting in some kind of sketchy ways or ways that didn't result in great outcomes for their kids, right?
Hmm.
And so, yes, that could have happened to you, right? 100% believe everyone who tells me what happened to them as a child, because in reality, that was their interpretation of what happened. That was their experience. That
Hmm.
was probably, more truthful, I would think, than a parent who's trying to cover up maybe what they did incorrectly. Because a lot of
Hmm.
times parents have a hard time admitting, even to their own child, that they made mistakes. And sometimes these aren't
Hmm.
serious mistakes. Sometimes these are just little things, but it can make it so that it's difficult for your child to fully hold responsibility for their actions as an adult when they've got the scapegoat of blaming the parent.
Hmm.
That being said, when you are an adult, the responsibility to fix whatever happened to you as a child in order to experience your best outcomes, your highest outcomes, unfortunately, that does fall to you. You may
Hmm.
never get the I'm sorry from the parent. You may never get the I was wrong. You may never get the feedback you're looking for, right, from what
Hmm.
happened, but you can heal yourself and heal any damages that happened. So I'm really
For
glad
sure.
that you brought up that responsibility, because
Hmm.
unfortunately that's an added responsibility that becomes yours as an adult. And
Hmm.
but it will help you the sooner you address that stuff that you're carrying with you. And parents fear that too. They're like, oh my gosh, what if I didn't do a good enough job? What if I
Hmm.
didn't do a good enough job and my kid gets out there and they don't know what to do?
Hmm.
And trust me, if you're the parent asking that question, you probably did a good enough job.
Yeah.
It's the parents that are not asking that question that
Hmm.
probably didn't.
Well, and I like kind of like you said, it's just the fear is always going to be there, no matter what you did as a parent, whether you think you did an amazing job, there's always that fear of, oh, well, what if they make, one small choice that, pushes them down the wrong path or whatever. Or sometimes too, as a parent, you can do a great job and do everything you're quote unquote supposed to do, and something still go wrong and your kid not follow the path. And, so that's something to kind of consider. But as a parent, mom, I just always remember, like, as kids, you being very open with the three of us, me and my two siblings, about things you feared, whether it was you feared for our future or there were certain situations going on in that present moment that you feared about, just anything like that. So why, as a parent, did did you, I guess, as a parent, choose to make a conscious decision to share your fears with us instead of, rather, hiding them and just kind of dealing them with yourself? Or what did that look like as a parent?
Mhm. I did make a conscious decision to share my fear with you guys. However, it was edited, right? It was edited to an age appropriate level where you were at.
Hmm.
The reason why I chose to share it with you guys is because I think it is elementally important for children to see their parent having disagreements, struggling with something in life, being afraid, any of those things that as parents we might have a tendency to try to protect our children from or to hide from them, I feel is not really doing them a service, because they need to see that you can come out from the other side of a disagreement
Hmm.
and a relationship can be okay. You can come out from a time that you were struggling and make everything copacetic, right? Again, in your
Hmm.
life financially or whatever that might be, you can come out on the other side of being afraid. And I wanted you guys to see how I handled those situations and to be able to witness through modeling what tools I used in order to get there. The
Hmm.
biggest tool of all being willing to talk about it. I think, like, you said earlier, sometimes kids don't want to admit that they're afraid because they think it makes them seem weak or it makes them seem incapable or immature, or and
Hmm.
not at all, right? It's fear is something that we deal with even as an elderly person who may be facing death or facing having to move into an assisted living, or having to retire and go, primarily on social security if they don't have a lot of money saved for retirement. There's all kinds of fears. Fear is something that never goes away. And so I made a choice so that you guys could see me model to you what it looks like to deal with fears and come out on the other side of
Hmm.
that. How do you feel like that affected you and your ability?
Like you said, when you were talking about kind of like the biggest tool, just being open about fear and addressing it, I think that one that helped me as a kid, whether it was with you or my friends or other family or whoever, kind of recognize fear and talk about it as well. I think seeing you be so open with it pushed me to be open with it, and understanding that just because I'm afraid of something or, whatever, doesn't mean that I have to keep it a secret. And in fact, it's better to talk about it and better to get it out because like you said, you fear at every stage in life. When you're a little kid, you have a fear of something. When you're a young adult, you have fear of something. When you're middle age, you have fear of something. When you're older, you fear of something. So like fear is always going to be there, no matter what age you are, no matter how much self work you do, no matter anything like that. Fear is always going to be there. So I think that seeing you be so open with it and it being an open discussion just helped it to be an open discussion for me and helped me process that. And then, knowing as I was a kid and as I'm growing up of saying, okay, mom, like, I have this decision to make. Like, I'm kind of afraid of what my life's going to look like if I do this or I do that. And so being able to have those discussions with you helped me kind of tackle that fear. And then when times in my life have come up where I'm afraid of something and I have that fear, and for whatever reason I can't talk to you, or it's a quick decision I need to make or whatever, I feel like I have the tools in my toolbox to help me through that. And a large part of that is because like I felt like you always talked about it and were open about it. I think that also gave me a real view of what life was like. As a kid, it's easy to think, okay, you go to work, you come home, you take care of your kids, you cook dinner, you go to bed. Like that's, what it looks like. So I think seeing it from a realistic perspective definitely helped.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times fear is something that we manifest in our head, right? And so we sit there and we project all these things onto what could possibly happen in the future. And in reality, out of the 300 things that we could think are going to happen in a certain situation, it might not be any of those.
Uh-huh.
So I think we can spend a lot of time doing that. But I think what us sharing those things as a family has done is to prove that no matter what, you're going to come out okay on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, where we are living in our country in America and the things we've got going on without getting into politics, like things are very uncertain. This is not something that's gone on before. This can elicit a lot of fear in people. Oh, what is going to happen in November? Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
big thing, right? And, you know, a lot of things aren't going to change in November, but potentially there are a lot of things that could. And so it's that uncertainty and that not knowing. But because we have always faced fear head on and used the tools in the toolbox, like you're talking about, to get through that. And we've always come out okay on the other side. And
Mm-hmm.
so while things could get dire and could get dark for a while and have in the past, right? I think we trust ourselves to do what we can to get through that together. So
For sure.
talking about that toolbox, Cayd. So how do you approach fear? What ways, what things do you
Mm-hmm.
do to approach fear? And then what have you learned from pushing through fear
For
using
sure.
those tools?
So I think one thing that I've come to realize recently is that you're not always, if you're, let's say you're looking at, just for an example, making a change in your career, a lot of the times you're not afraid of making that change. That's not what the root of the fear is. Your fear is either, what are people going to think about me, or what does this look like in my future? If I switch to this new company, what is that going to look like long term? Or, maybe you're switching to like a commission only position and there's that fear of how am I going to pay my bills. There's so many different things to be afraid of that sometimes I think we're kind of clouded and we kind of look at the surface level instead of figuring out what we're really afraid of. So that's one thing that I have been working on is figuring out, the cause of the fear and what are you actually afraid of? Are you afraid of what people are going to think? Are you afraid of what your life's going to look like? Are you afraid of, how you're going to be able to maintain your responsibilities? Whatever it is, I think that it's important to either sit with yourself, or I think we talked about this in a couple episodes ago, how for me at least talking with someone else and especially with you sometimes kind of answers my own questions and pops up ideas into my mind that I wasn't thinking before. Just talking to you about, hey, like I'm, thinking about making this decision, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of talking it out with you. Sometimes you don't even have to say it. It just kind of clicks in my brain. So that is one thing that I really recommend is either talking, even if it's just with yourself, taking a little bit of time to yourself to talk things out, figure out where your head is at, or, if you do have a loved one that you trust and can talk to about it, definitely do that. And kind of like you said, what have I learned from pushing through fear? And you've said it a couple times, you're always going to be okay on the other side. You know, even if you make, a bad choice, and obviously I'm not talking about extreme bad choices, but if you, again, going back to the job example, if you take that new job, worst case scenario, you don't like the job or you're not making enough or you're not, whatever the situation is, and you can turn around and get another job, or you can, try to talk to your boss and see if there's a different, project you can take on that'll maybe fulfill you a little bit more. So I think that that's one thing that I've learned from pushing through fear is you're always going to be okay on the other end. and that the other end doesn't result in your life coming to a complete end and just everything's over and it sucks. I think sometimes we dramatize what that looks like. And just knowing that, if you're afraid of making a change, again, whether it is a job or moving or just, even maybe it's ending a relationship or starting a new relationship, there's so many things that we can be afraid of. And I think if you just dive into that and just kind of be willing to accept any outcome that comes out of it and know that that's just life and that's your journey, I think that that's kind of a beautiful thing. And just being able to accept the fact that, hey, I was afraid to make this decision and this is what I decided to do. And I'm standing 10 toes down on it. And I'm confident in my choice. And this is what I'd like to do. And, whatever happens, happens. If that means that you say, okay, I made the wrong choice and now I need to go get a different job, or I need to move cities again, or I need to, end this relationship that I just started, whatever it is. I think that just diving in head first is, for me at least, has been very beneficial. But mom, what about you? What steps do you take to put fear in check and address it and work through it?
Yeah. So, one of the things that you mentioned is that sometimes the only person you're talking to about it is yourself. And one of the ways that I do it is I do it through journaling. So I need to acknowledge that it's fear that's keeping me stuck, right? That's keeping me from making a change or making a decision. And so if I sit there and I'm like, okay, what's stopping me? Okay, it's fear. What is that feeling? And allow myself to actually feel that and then call myself out on any
Mm-hmm.
excuses I'm making, right? So I have a pretty good track record of things being okay, and sometimes way better than okay. When you make that choice, like it's not always just going to be an okay or a bad outcome. Sometimes it's an outcome you couldn't have even imagined in your best dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
So getting that on paper for me is really a big thing. And kind of walking through that. And I approached everything through a growth mindset. Like I can learn how to fix, do, change, adapt to anything. Sometimes it might be a little harder for me. Sometimes it might be a little easier for me, depending on what comes naturally. But I've got a good track record, right? Of being able to do that stuff. And I've done it many different times and have morphed myself and transitioned and pivoted many different times. So that growth mindset, not a this is who I am, this is how I do things, and limiting beliefs, I can't do that, I don't deserve that, all of those kinds of things don't come into my head because I have a growth mindset of I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also believe in abundance. So there is plenty of opportunity out there. There is plenty of space for each of us out there
Mm-hmm.
in the world. There are plenty of people for us to make friends with or to develop relationships with. So to not think of in those limiting mindsets, right, really help me to conquer fear. And sometimes abundance and growth mindset, sometimes you need to remind yourself of those
Mm-hmm.
things. And because I've talked to you kids that way, I even hear you spewing that stuff back at me sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
which is that's really good for my mama heart, number one, to realize that you guys have internalized that. But number two, that we have an open enough communication style that you are not afraid to throw that right back at me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, I heard myself say something and I sound just like my mother or just like my dad. When my kids sound like me, it makes me feel really good because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they absorbed what I've been trying so hard to impart for them, because I think society has changed and the way that my generation parented these kids that are coming up now is very different than the way that I was parented. And I expect, Cayd, that your generation will probably raise kids in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
You will come from a growth and abundance mindset,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you will approach things differently. One of the biggest tools for me is to do what I call prepare myself for battle. And that is, I am getting my sleep. I am getting my nutrition. I am doing all of my self care things. I'm doing my journaling. I'm spending time with people that I love and enjoy. I'm not just nose to the grindstone, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
hammering away. So I'm going to focus on my why, and I'm going to make sure that I have taken care of myself so that physically and mentally I am in the right space to tackle whatever it is that I am afraid of. Now, preparing for battle, right? That needs to happen before you're on the battlefield. So start now. And then by the time some of the craziness gets here, right, you're in a much better place to be able to move forward. The biggest thing you can do, like Cayd said, is take action, like just to dive in. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be big things, right? We're not talking about just big choices. Sometimes it's little choices that we stress over or fret over. And so just doing the next right thing, you don't have to see the
Mm-hmm.
whole path, just do the very next right thing. And then you do that, you succeed, you're happy with it, then do the next right thing. So I try to take things in bite-sized chunks
Hmm.
and not be like, okay, I need to know exactly where I'm going to land 3 years from now. No, I don't. I need to know where I would like to be tomorrow, where I would like to be at
Exactly.
the end of the month and by next year,
Hmm.
right? Bite-sized chunks. So those small steps are important. Staying present in the moment, listening to how I feel, trusting my gut. Those are all tools that I use.
Hmm.
And then the one that everybody at every job I've ever worked at gets tired of hearing me say is celebrate all of those little successes. So, I have been part of some really huge projects before, and they're scary and they're intimidating. But when we've taken it one chunk at a time and we have celebrated along the way, oh, we can check that box, we got that done. Now we can focus on the next right things. So just
Hmm.
making sure that you're celebrating those steps. So those are all tools that I try to utilize and that I have learned over the years and I hope have modeled to you
Hmm.
guys. Any
Yeah,
of
for
those
sure.
stick out to you, Cayd?
All of them really. And I just, something that came to my mind while you were talking was just like fear is okay and it's normal and it's gonna be there. I think that sometimes we try to put on, and we as in just, society, try to put on a front of, oh, I'm not afraid, of making this decision, or, I'm confident in my decision, or, and again, whether it's big, small, whatever the case may be, I think that sometimes we try to pressure ourselves to not fear things. And I think that in the end,
Mm-hmm.
that almost ends up hurting us because fear is there for a reason. It's there
Yeah.
to get us to take a second and stop and weigh our options and think about what we're about to do. So I think that fear isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it's not something that you need to try to work to get rid of, or you need to try to stop, fearing things or anything like that. But it's just something that you need to recognize that it's there and come up with healthy ways to deal with the fear. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that is how fear becomes a positive thing. I think fear can be very negative and can be hurtful if you are feeling fearful and you just shut down, or you don't know how to process it
Mm-hmm.
correctly, and you don't know how to weigh the pros and the cons of different options. But I think if you can really sit with yourself, figure out what drives that fear, and figure out how to address it. And it's different for everyone. What works for us won't work for you. And but that's the point. You're supposed to figure out, okay, this did not help, my fear. I'm still afraid of this. Or, oh, this, little tool actually helped. So I think that that's something that's important to recognize, is that fear is not going to go away. It's not going to change. It's not a bad thing inherently, but you can definitely make it a positive.
That's very true. That fear can be fuel, right, to get you to act. So,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes fear can cause us to kind of tolerate all kinds of discomfort and craziness that we don't want to be tolerating, but we stay stuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not moving forward because we're paralyzed by the unknown. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can use fear as fuel to motivate you to move from where you are to where you want to be. That's all fear is in that
For
space,
sure.
right? Between those two things. So together as a family, right, if we can help support each other as we kind of navigate towards calmer waters, there's going to be another wave that crashes on the shore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of time. And the more we do it, the better we get at it. So even if we're just stabilizing the things we can actually control. So when we're looking at what's happening around us, big picture, right? Like, I know there are certain things I can do between now and November that are within my control, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I am one person among millions. So there's only so much that I can do. And so if I'm controlling my environment, I'm controlling my relationships, I'm controlling my day to day choices, and you're doing the same, and we're helping each other do that as a family. Again, we can use that fear as fuel to give us positive outcomes and to become stronger on the other side.
For sure.
As a parent, I would recommend that people keep their eyes and ears open. So, again, this is unique times. Your kids are new to adulting. And while they sometimes think they know everything, that never happens, right, Kate? They still might need you sometimes to help you or help them through the scary stuff. But you need to make sure to ask them if they want their help and be sure to respect it when they say no.
For sure. And I think if you're a young adult, remember that your parents have, already been through what you've been through. They've made those life transitions. They've been a young adult, they've been around. So if what is going on in society or in your life is bringing up the emotion of fear, know that everyone experiences those emotions and they've experienced them either currently or have experienced them in the past, and be open to learning new things and taking new risks. and, just weighing all your options. It doesn't make you weak or immature. And like I said, fear is not a bad thing. If you're afraid, that doesn't mean that, you just aren't confident in yourself or you're not confident in the decisions that you can make. But it's just that you need to figure out what tools that you'd like to try and what works for you, and know who your trusted people are before you hit that scary spot of fear. So that way you can talk to them, whether it is before, during, or after that scary moment. You're able to talk to them and have open conversation with them. Do you have anything else to add, Mom?
The only thing I would add to that is, yes, there are times that fear protects you, right? There are times that fear alerts you to danger, actual, legitimate danger, not what we're imagining in our heads. So just be sure that the fear that you are responding to is real and not something you've imagined in your head, because everything good is on the other side of fear.
For sure, for sure. I like that you said that everything good is on the other side of fear, and sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith, or make that decision to get to the good side. But with all that being said, I think that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. Thank you all for listening today. We hope that you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Above it all, we hope that this is an opportunity for an open conversation between bigs and their parents to talk about the struggles that we all go through in life, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly, as my mom always says. We are definitely not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little bit easier for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please subscribe and share with others who you may know who might benefit from hearing this episode, previous episodes, or you just think might enjoy the show. The new episode comes out every Monday, again on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
And you can visit my life coaching website at marcihawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarci@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marci and Instagram at life_coach_Marci. Where can our listeners find you, Cayd?
You guys can find me across all social media platforms at the Cayd Berrigan. That is just the Cayd Berrigan. Like I said, on all social media platforms. The best way to contact us, whether you'd like to give us feedback, ask questions, leave a review, or suggest a topic, is to DM either one of us on social media or reach out via the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcihawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, or questions that you may have, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.